Why is it important to learn history? Why is history so interesting to learn about? History is so interesting because learning about famous and everyday people, events, stories, and the successes and failures of people, nations, civilizations, and organizations can be important and meaningful. Locations and objects in your community, sometimes things as mundane as names of streets, can reflect the long heritage of past generations where you live.
Above all, studying local history can fill you with knowledge that history is all around you. You don't need to visit Rome or London or any other country to see reflections of the past, because your own community contains many sites and records with a rich history. Learning about local history can help you realize the grand scheme of historical change is made up of countless individuals like you and me, and those around us, who in their own ways contributed to the ongoing story of our community. And this story likely contains fascinating information that's really worth finding and preserving. For the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to just choose one place in Bethlehem and explore some of the structures which make up part of our community. In so doing, you may learn how interesting and important our community is. You don't have to be an expert in history, and you can explore your own community on your own anytime. If you're curious and you care to learn, there are so many sites here in Bethlehem for you to learn about. As an American community, Bethlehem is quite old, having been founded in the year 1741. The people who settled early Bethlehem were from Europe, and they wanted to escape tyranny. They were anxious to be free to worship their God their way. The Moravians, as they were called, settled their community at the junction of two rivers. Today we call them the Lehigh and the Monocacy. Almost immediately, these settlers decided that their new community would be closed to outsiders and that they would become as self-sufficient as possible. This meant that they needed to be ingenious in solving everyday problems. These early settlers created what can only be called an early industrial park. It was a place where they could set up the various trades needed to manufacture many of the community's daily needs. The area that they chose to locate their early businesses has become known today as the Colonial Industrial Quarter, and it's located on approximately 1 square mile of land between what is now Main Street and the Monocacy Creek. The water from the creek was used to power the mills that were built in this area. Soon, quite a few critical businesses were located, beginning in the 18th century and continuing daily use until almost the middle of the 19th century. But the closed community could not remain isolated forever, and the canal, railroads, and the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution intruded upon this small community. Learning the history of Bethlehem and appreciating it requires some understanding of this area. And this story will hopefully prove how important knowledge of history is, because without this knowledge and without an understanding of our own history, we can possibly lose our connection to our past. Many buildings of historical significance are lost in communities across the United States every year because of this general lack of interest. In Bethlehem, we were in danger of losing the Colonial Industrial Quarter mainly due to neglect. Fortunately, there were citizens living in the community in the 1950s and 1960s who had historical knowledge, and they worked hard to save and preserve our industrial quarter. Today, due to that interest, you and I, can enjoy this area and learn how the early Moravians lived more than 200 years ago. Now, the images that you'll see in this presentation are from a book that I wrote a few years ago called Then and Now, The Colonial Industrial Quarter. We were fortunate enough to have access to some old pictures taken by a local citizen named Tamar Bair. And her interest, more than 50 years ago, sparked my own interest to examine this area closely and to document the changes that have taken place. I hope you'll learn that preserving these structures has been very important to preserving our community's identity.